Nomination withdrawn. The president's pick to run the Department of Veterans Affairs says he will not pursue the job. Silencing pro-lifers. Lawmakers examine whether conservatives are being censored on social media. Family's agony. The parents of Alfie Evans are still fighting for their little boy, who has moved the world with his case. And the future of medicine. We talk with a famous doctor taking part in a Vatican conference. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, April 26, 2018.
The yeas are 57, the nays are 42. The nomination is confirmed.
After a controversial confirmation process, the Senate gives the nod to current CIA Director Mike Pompeo to be Secretary of State. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Pompeo is getting to work right away as the U.S. top diplomat. He was sworn in this afternoon by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. His confirmation comes as President Trump is talking about backing out of the Iran nuclear deal and planning to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Pompeo, a former Kansas congressman, fills the spot left vacant when the president fired Rex Tillerson in March. President Trump is looking for a new Veterans Affairs secretary. Admiral Ronnie Jackson dropped out. He's facing several accusations of unbecoming conduct. He remains the White House doctor. Correspondent Mark Irons spoke to a former White House official who knows a thing or two about staff shakeups. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Anthony Scaramucci is the former White House communications director. He has firsthand experience with personnel rearrangement in the Trump administration. Today, he weighed in on Admiral Jackson, who is accused of recklessly prescribing drugs and drunken behavior. Jackson denies the allegations, and President Trump supports him.
He's a great man, and he got treated very, very unfairly. He got treated really unfairly.
The president stands by Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who announced this morning he's withdrawing his nomination. These false allegations have become a distraction for this president and the important issue we must be addressing: how we give the best care to our nation's heroes. Today, the president addressed some of those heroes at the White House, vets who suffered injuries in combat.
We will forever be grateful for the sacrifices you made for all of us.
The question now becomes, who is the president's next pick to run the VA, a massive federal agency with 360,000 employees serving 9 million vets, now that an allegation-plagued Admiral Jackson is backing out?
Admiral Jackson is a decorated American. Admiral Jackson is an American patriot.
Anthony Scaramucci, or the Mooch as he's called, knows what it's like to experience a fall from grace in the White House. He spent a brief 11 days as the White House communications director last summer. After giving a vulgar interview, he was then fired by Chief of Staff John Kelly. But the self-proclaimed practicing Catholic tells me faith is helping him keep things in perspective.
As a Roman Catholic, what lessons in faith have you learned from your time inside the White House to where you are now?
The number one lesson is about forgiveness. If you don't forgive yourself in life, you're a Roman Catholic, you know that you're quite dispensable and you're going to return to dust. You know that from your theology. And what I would say to you is that I made a lot of mistakes, but the first person that you have to forgive in life is yourself.
Scaramucci says he built a nice relationship with White House Dr. Ronnie Jackson during the time he was here last summer. As for the future of Jackson inside the White House, today Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said, quote, Admiral Jackson is a doctor in the United States Navy assigned to the White House and is here at work today. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. EPA Chief Scott Pruitt faced tough questions from lawmakers about first-class flights, a sweetheart condo lease, and outsized security spending.
You removed the head of the EPA office that found that you did not face direct death threats. Has it always been your practice to fire people who disagree with you?
I mean, Mr. Congressman, the Inspector General himself has noted that the threats
you're
against
not
me are
answering yes or no, so
with respect
again,
to the quantity and the type of threats.
Yeah.
One lawmaker defended him, saying it's shameful that the questions turned into personal attacks. On Capitol Hill today, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis focused on the value of certain aspects of the Iran nuclear deal, even as President Trump considers pulling out of that agreement. Joining me now is Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, also a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and took part in yesterday's joint meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be back with you again.
Macron said in the joint meeting to Congress that the U.S. should remain in this 2015 nuclear deal. President Trump has called this nuclear accord, as brokered by former President Obama, insane and ridiculous, and he made canceling it a central campaign promise. Should the U.S. withdraw from this deal?
The biggest issue that we have with the deal is not what happens in the first decade, it's what happens in the decade after that. And that's always been the issue with Israel, with the United States, and with multiple other partners. And quite frankly, Macron mentioned it even yesterday in the joint session. He said, well, we've got to make sure this deal holds 5 years, 10 years. And what he's really implying is what we've always said. This only puts a temporary hold on Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. It actually gives them permission to get a nuclear weapon just about 7 years from now.
2025.
We can't have that happen. They're still the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. That's right. So when you have the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world that's headed towards a nuclear weapon rather than away from it, we have to address that. That's been the primary problem with the deal from the very beginning.
But Macron said he told President Trump that killing the deal would open Pandora's box and lead to a possible war. Do you think that's true?
I don't think it's going to lead to a possible war. What was interesting was Macron was kind of trying to have it both ways in the speech. He was saying we can't cancel the deal, but we need to add a lot to the deal. So basically what he's saying is we need a new deal. Let's just build on the one that we have. That may be a different way of saying the exact same thing that President Trump is saying. President Trump is identifying Iran launching missiles and testing missiles that are capable of carrying a nuclear weapon, continuing the process of their own investigation and their own research. These are things that lead towards nuclear weapons, not away from it. These are exceptions in the rule for the JCPOA, that nuclear agreement with Iran. And so there's just too many loopholes in it. So whether it's Macron's way of saying, let's keep the deal, let's just add another one on top of it, or it's President Trump saying, junk this one and make one larger deal, they're both basically saying the same thing.
Well, not according to Rouhani, the president of Iran. He says, we will start at a new speed which will be shocking to them if this deal is scrapped or, if anything, is added to it.
Which has been the concern all along, is that we know that Iran is still headed that direction. They still want to be able to get a nuclear weapon. They're looking for any excuse that they can make to be able to head that direction, and I think they'll continue to do that. The issue that Iran has always had is they needed money and time. They had the technology, they had done the research, they just needed money and time. The hard part about the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal was it gave them money and time.
Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Are social media networks blocking conservative content? That's the question asked today on Capitol Hill. Social media stars Diamond and Silk say yes, while Democrats call the hearing a Republican charade. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Facebook, Twitter, and Google didn't show up to today's hearing, even though they were invited. Now, one scholar says there's no evidence that conservatives are being targeted, but still a well-known pair of Trump supporters say they are the evidence.
Trump supporters Diamond and Silk have 1.6 million followers on Facebook.
Censorship is no hoax. It's real. It's wrong for these social media giants to suppress and disregard people by diminishing and denying them their free speech.
The duo say Facebook kept their content from reaching their large audience. They even received this from the social media giant. The policy team has come to the conclusion that your content and your brand have been determined unsafe to the community. But Representative Jim Himes, a Democrat from Connecticut, says it's a hoax to say Facebook targets conservatives. He tells me this hearing is just meant to rally the conservative base.
The idea that these massive companies are deliberately targeting half of their customers is absurd.
But Diamond and Silk did receive a letter from Facebook that seemed to say that they were being targeted for being unsafe.
Yeah, no, and we've all acknowledged, and Facebook has acknowledged that Facebook screwed up on that point, right? And they came out and acknowledged it publicly.
Facebook's CEO was grilled on this issue this month when he testified before Congress.
What is unsafe about 2 black women supporting President Donald J. Trump?
Well, Congressman, nothing is unsafe about that.
Today, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn testified about her own Senate campaign ad.
Last October, Twitter blocked my campaign launch video from its ads platform due to my pro-life message. This ban threatened the fundamental freedom to engage in political speech.
Twitter did finally allow that ad from Representative Marsha Blackburn. The organization, the National Religious Broadcasters, asks, why does religious and conservative content seem to fall in the crosshairs? Is it an algorithm or is it discrimination? Professor Ari Waldman testified today that lots of content does get filtered out both from the left and the right, and there's no data that conservatives are filtered out more. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. The father of Alfie Evans, a terminally ill toddler in the UK, pulled off of life support, wants him to come home. He's calling on doctors to release him from a Liverpool hospital. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us outside of the British Embassy in Washington, where pro-lifers gathered to pray. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Pro-life Catholics are calling on the British government to let Alfie Evans' parents decide how they want to treat their son's rare medical condition. Up until now, doctors in Liverpool and UK courts have been making key decisions, which many say need to change. More than a dozen offered prayers while touching the outside wall to the British Embassy in Washington.
Alfie's Army! Alfie's Army!
They're raising awareness to the plight of Alfie Evans and his parents, who say their son has been held hostage in a Liverpool hospital.
Alfie is a 23-month-old disabled child with an fully diagnosed neurological disorder. His parents wanted to take him to an Italian hospital to seek cutting-edge medical treatment.
Pope Francis tells Alfie's parents they have his support and can bring their son to the Vatican hospital. But medical professionals and the UK court are not allowing Alfie to leave, saying further treatment is futile for a child they say is in a semi-vegetative state. On Monday, by court order, doctors took him off life support. Many expected Alfie to die, but his father says his son is still breathing.
Alfie lives comfortably, happily, without ventilation. That must be enough for you now to consider that Alfie may prove you wrong all the way through this, and this could be a general misdiagnosis.
His parents' lawyer tells us despite months of legal battles, they're not giving up.
We are looking at every possible legal means, so we're going to keep on fighting. It's a positive happening and an answer to prayers that he's alive and that he's going home. We're grateful for that, but we want the full miracle on this one.
Supporters, known as Alfie's Army, protest regularly outside the hospital. Back here in the U.S., pro-life parents are voicing their support.
It's important to be here because Alfie is not alone. Alfie is with our prayers, our commitment.
Alfie's case has been front-page news for weeks in Italy, where supporters there are praying a novena in St. Peter's Square. Case has also sparked a wider debate about the UK's National Health Service and whether state-run healthcare may be the source of the problem. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from outside the British Embassy in Washington. Thank you. Lebanon is accused of evicting refugees from Syria on questionable legal grounds. A human rights group is calling on authorities to step in and stop the evictions. The group says more than 3,500 Syrians have been forced onto the streets, and that the moves appear to be coming from the military and not Lebanon's government. A cry for help. Venezuelan bishops make an urgent appeal to government leaders. In a statement released Monday, the bishops called for a change in direction. They are asking Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to reconsider his re-election. They say a presidential election could, quote, trigger a humanitarian catastrophe. Coming up, we talk with a renowned professor of law who says the legal system in America is putting adults ahead of children. And Pope Francis tells the faithful what the church needs to move and grow. A jury finds comedian Bill Cosby guilty on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault. The 80-year-old was convicted of sexually assaulting a Temple University employee in 2004. Cosby could spend his final years in prison. A new book says children born to unmarried parents are in trouble from day one. Helen Alvarez writes, children born out of wedlock will experience worse economic, educational, and emotional outcomes than the children of a married couple. The book is Putting Children's Interests First in U.S. Family Law and Policy. Helen joins me now. She's a professor of family law and constitutional law at George Mason University. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much.
You say recent Supreme Court rulings put adults' sexual expression ahead of children's well-being. How so?
Well, the courts have basically said that adult sexual expression is a constitutional right, even though it's not in the text. The problem is what that's led to is when adults exercise these rights, as the courts call them, you know, children's family structure is created at the moment of conception. And when children are conceived and born out of wedlock, or frankly, even if they're conceived out of wedlock and then their parents marry later, we know, and sociology is pretty consistent on this, that on average, those children will suffer worse outcomes educationally, economically, cognitively, and it's responsible for a huge part of the gap between the better off and the poor in the United States.
I was going to ask, is this more prevalent among the lower socioeconomic levels?
In the U.S., if you have the good fortune to have a college degree, you're probably also going to have a good job, you are drastically less likely to have a non-marital pregnancy. If you are poor and in your community you have everything from a lack of good educational opportunities, less job opportunities, frankly, fewer marriageable men, it's not going to be as if you're trading off some huge future opportunity. That child is a gift to you. Every child is a gift, but in particular, that child seems to be the best and most possible gift that you could have in your life, even without marriage.
You write it remains dangerous to write about this, and that many people have challenged you, saying, what right do you have to tell me how to live my life? What do you say to that?
I say the problem is that the people who are saying that are actually not doing any favor, especially for women and the poor. We've known for decades that this is the case. And what we have now, and why I wanted to write the book, is we have a government situation, the Supreme Court, and sometimes in the White House, and a lot of time in state government, they're actually promoting adult sexual expression with absolutely no regard for children, as if it is the primary right, and they really don't have much concern for the situation into which the children are born.
So many of the problems you describe began with birth control, the sexual revolution of the 1960s. And at that time, Blessed Paul VI wrote Humanae Vitae.
Right.
Did he get it right? His letter explaining the church's vision of marriage and rejecting artificial birth control?
You know, we can show now, better than we could then, that what he said about when you take away even the idea that sex is related to children, that sex has weight because it's linked to marriage, future, family, kin, love, that we would see this huge objectification of women, this huge devaluing of children. We knew it intellectually, he knew it, and theologically, but now we see it as an experiment we've conducted on children for 50 years, and we can prove it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Helen Alvarez. I have your book right here and have read it. Putting Children's Interests First in U.S. Family Law and Policy. And the last part of this talks about solutions, which we didn't have a chance to get to.
Yes.
We'll have to have you back. Thank you so much, Helen Alvarez. Former President George H.W. Bush remains in the hospital, but one of his sons says he may not be there much longer.
The guy is stronger than an ox. He's back out of ICU and hopefully will be leaving the hospital on Friday. So for those that believe in faith, I hope you'll pray for my dad.
This he said during a speech yesterday at Brown University. He also mentioned his mother during that speech, who died last week at the age of 92. He told the crowd if he had canceled this speech at Brown because of her death, quote, she would have kicked my butt. Up next, offering a diagnosis, a famous TV doctor tells us why he's at the Vatican. And kid-friendly. For some at EWTN, Bring Your Child to Work Day hits home.
Abbi pietà di noi.
Pope Francis says without love, the church cannot grow or move. At his daily mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father said we find the best example of that love in Jesus. The Vatican has invited religious leaders and medical professionals to discuss the future of medicine. Organizers say dialogue is the first step.
We want to gather them and to, let's say, create a hotspot, not only for discussion, but also for mutual action, because to solve important problems today, you need multiple stakeholders to get together.
This is the fourth time the Vatican is hosting this conference. This year's theme is How Science, Technology, and 21st Century Medicine Will Impact Culture and Society. That's a long title. For several famous Americans, they're taking part, including Dr. Mehmet Oz, host of the Dr. Oz Show and professor of surgery at New York Presbyterian Hospital and Columbia University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's a very special day for me to be here in the Vatican.
We don't usually associate you with the Vatican, yet there you are, standing inside Vatican City. How did you get involved in this conference?
Well, I have some very good friends who put this program together. Dr. Smith and Gomez and others have gotten medicine and organized religion talking and more fruitfully. And of course, when the Holy Father says that the Vatican is willing to host an event that allows scientists and folks who of faith to speak to each other very openly, and that's what we've been doing so far today, it does get people thinking much more deeply about what it's all about.
And you don't say no, really. This morning you moderated a panel on the culture of life and religious influence on health with a priest, a rabbi, and a Mormon elder. The panel was examining the role of faith in patient care, patient recovery. How does one's faith have an impact on the healing process?
Well, I should point out the panelists were also all doctors. So you have leaders of their faiths who are also physicians, so they, or doctors, I should say, and they understand each other quite well for that reason. But at its very core, they all said that when you're ill, you don't want to be defined by your illness. And religion allows you to go beyond that. In fact, it pushes you to realize that you may not always understand everything, and it's okay. And that you can forgive that reality. And by dispersing with a lot of the baggage that you carry through an illness, it frees you to be the person that you can be. And by giving you the emotional support that we know benefits patients, but all of us, even when we're not ill, you seem to get improved results.
Why is it important, in your view, for members of the medical community to dialogue with the faith leaders, and especially in this case, the Catholic Church?
You know, when we ask patients, do they want to talk to their doctors about faith, they generally say no. But if you ask patients, do they want to talk about faith, period, they say yes, which means there's a gap. The average American, the average person who gets ill and goes to a hospital around the world feels uncomfortable messing with that covenant, that sacred relationship they have with their doctor, yet they actually want more guidance. And doctors, it turns out, sort of want to talk about it because they realize it's part of getting their patients better. So we need to bridge that gap. And if we can do that in a meaningful way and not introduce guilt into the process, which is what the big fear is and has been in the past, then you can get success. The Catholic Church has been very much in the forefront of wanting to break down these barriers, to get us to realize that healing is not the same thing as finding meaning. And you want to do both in your life.
Isn't that true? Well, I know you're headed back to New York this weekend for the Emmys. Best of luck to you, Dr. Mehmet Oz, host of the Dr. Oz Show. And finally tonight, the questions at today's White House press briefing were a little different than usual, including one about the first family getting a pet.
A dog? Ooh, that's a good question, and one we probably should ask the First Lady.
Press Secretary Sarah Sanders celebrated Take Your Child to Work Day, and our White House producer Toby Capian brought two of his sons, Simon and Joseph. And here is Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill, and this is 5-year-old Anthony, and ta-da, Kylie and Luke are here. Show the audience what Donald Trump signed for you today, your press pass. These are two of the children of our political operations manager, Paul Fifield. Wave to your grandparents in California. See, the camera's right there. Can you wave? Hold up your little pass there. It's Ami and who? Poppy. Hi, Abby. Hi, Poppy. Thank you for watching tonight. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Good night, and God bless you.